This is Kate Stalker interviewing Mary Eberle on Wednesday, July 3rd, 2019. Mary, thanks for coming today. Tell me why you'd like to share your story.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me. I am new to Monona, and I am looking for ways to get involved with my community. So this is a great project, and I hope to meet new people and find out about organizations in the community. I have been to one meeting at the Monona Community Center and met some people there, and just looking forward to learning more about Monona.
Great. So let's start with when and where you were born.
I was born in 1963 in Beaver Dam, so just up the road. And my dad worked for Green Giant, and Green Giant had a facility there in Beaver Dam. So we lived there just for a couple of years.
Great. So tell me about your parents or grandparents.
As I mentioned, my dad worked for Green Giant when I was a kid. And my mom was a school teacher, so she taught before I was born, and then again when I was probably about 16 or so. And my mom's parents, they're somewhat farmers. My grandpa had a farm, but he also worked for Bontas up in Neenah or Menasha, Wisconsin. My grandma was a teacher. She taught home ec at the tech school, and she was a wonderful cook. My dad's parents were from Omro, which is just outside of Oshkosh, and unfortunately, my grandfather passed away before I was born, but he was also a farmer, and my grandmother was a homemaker. And there are pictures of us. I did get to meet her, but I was quite young and I don't have any memories.
So were any of these people particularly influential in your life?
I would say my maternal grandfather, and also my aunt, who is my father's sister. So she was a school teacher, and she taught fourth grade. I remember when the fourth graders looked huge when I was a little kid, and ultimately they looked small when I was older. She never married, and she never had kids of her own, so she was always around for us. And, at family dinners, whether it was on my mom's side or my dad's side, and she is the most influential relative that I had.
What kind of things did you do together as a family?
We had the holiday meals together. My aunt actually ended up helping with my family research. She lived in the area in Oshkosh, and since both sides of my family were from the Fox River Valley, she knew quite a bit about the area, and she would help us with that, and was happy to go through graveyards and take photographs and things like that.
Interesting. So I know you're new to Monona, but when did you move here?
Well, we bought a condo in September of last year, so that was 2018, and we moved in the following month. So we have actually only been residents less than a year. But I got my first job when I graduated from college for a biotech company on Buckeye Road. And I lived downtown, so I was driving every day through Monona, and oftentimes we would go to lunch in Monona. And, I always admired the community and thought that it was a really neat place. So it's really nice to settle here.
Great. Did you have expectations about it before you moved here?
Well, I always knew that there were interesting shops, interesting restaurants. We were already going out to eat in a lot of restaurants here, and I had the expectation that it was a welcoming community and that the lake was here, of course. And, it always had a positive feeling to it.
So tell me about your favorite restaurants in Monona.
Well, we eat at Angelo's for pizza and Swad for Indian food and Ferboni's, the Italian place. We also go to a few others like Crema Cafe, which is really close to the condo. And we just checked out a new little breakfast coffee place, Rosie's, on Monona Drive last weekend.
And I know you moved from the east side of Madison, which has a lot of great restaurants to walk to as well. So you still have that ability to walk across the street and get something to eat.
Right.
That's great. So what other stores in Monona have you discovered?
I discovered a salon on Monona Drive, Studio Z. And then I have been checking out the shops at the bottom of Monona Drive near the Beltline. There's a little shopping mall with the credit union in it, which I belong to. And there is also the Staples store. I just went to the grocery store. I think it's a Pick and Save now. It's changed names several times. I found some really nice organic produce there at a very reasonable price. So I'm planning on shopping there more regularly.
Good. So have you met many people yet in Monona?
We bought a condo, and that is a great setup for meeting people. We can talk to our neighbors. We run into them. They had a great welcoming party, and we actually had multiple welcoming parties and dinner parties. And just this past week, we had the annual owner meeting. So we had interactions with them again. And I'm also doing a women's fitness class, and it's through the city of Madison, but there are several women in that class who live in Monona.
Oh, great. Do you participate in other sports or activities?
We like to bike, and of course there's the great bike path around the lake. And it is a great, about an hour long biking adventure. And it's really nice because you get really close to the lake and you're able to complete a loop in about an hour.
Yeah, great. So you may know that today starts Monona's biggest festival, the 4th of July Festival. Have you ever been?
Yes. We have attended the fireworks in Monona, I believe 2 different times. And we've come down to the park and watched them, being set off overhead, which is really fun. And we've also seen them from across the lake. So it's
from
great.
From your old house.
From the old house,
yeah. And what about this year?
This year, we probably will go in person to the park.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about your career. I know you've had several careers that have morphed into the business you have today. Can you give us a rundown of how you got where you are today?
Sure. I started out by getting my bachelor's degree in biology. And the first job that I had, as I mentioned earlier, was here in Madison. And in a place that was adjacent to Monona. So I worked in research labs for about 10 years, so 1 decade. And then I left the lab and I went back to school and I got my law degree. A lot of people are surprised by that, but I became a patent attorney, which let me use all of my scientific training and experience as a patent attorney. So I was writing patent applications and getting them approved by the patent office. And it was a really good chance to use those skills that I had from my biology background, but also to gain additional skills like writing and research and persuasive writing in particular. I did that for 13 years. And then I left and I started my own business. The business is DNA Hunters, and we find people's birth parents using DNA. People are testing at places like Ancestry, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA, and we're interpreting the results, looking at the matches family trees, and then finding the birth parents through those results.
Fascinating. And how long have you been doing that?
I have been doing that for 4.5 years.
Wow.
And I'm also teaching about how to use DNA. I teach in Madison through the Wisconsin Historical Society. And then I'm also teaching at various libraries, both in Wisconsin and Illinois. And I also teach at genealogy conferences. I just went to Canada and taught at one in Edmonton this spring. And then I taught in Ohio. And I've got 2 more coming up this fall. So around the country and now also in Canada.
That's great. What kind of people come to see you?
The people that come to see me are adoptees and also other people who don't know who their biological parents are. And sometimes it's that they themselves might not be the adoptee, but maybe their parents were. And they're trying to figure out who their parents' parents were. Mm-hmm. So the DNA testing is advertised as being a way to find out your heritage or more about your heritage. And sometimes people are testing, and when they get the test results back, they discover that the father who raised them was not their biological father. And that oftentimes leads them to wanting to find their biological father. Mm-hmm. So I've got clients who fall into that category also.
So it's a very sensitive subject.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Lots of emotions and yes, very sensitive.
I bet you wish you had a psychology degree too.
Yes.
So have you solved any cases?
I have. I have solved many cases, dozens of cases.
Can you tell us about maybe your favorite or the most exciting?
Well, I would say that I had a really interesting one this past summer with a woman born in London. And she knew that her birth father was Scottish. And we researched her matches, and she ultimately met her sister, with whom she shared the father, and it was just very, very nice to have that closure and to know something about the father. And it's always fascinating because oftentimes people have these traits in common with their birth parent. And in her instance, she learned that he was really fastidious with his belongings. And she had that trait too and never knew where it came from. So that was really interesting. And then the sister, her glasses looked exactly the same, the frames, but in addition, their prescription was the same. So those biological things that are
Sure.
in us that we just take for granted or we just never know where they come from, oftentimes you can figure that out when you determine who your biological parent is.
Did the sister live in Scotland?
She actually lived in London, which is where the Scottish birth father lived.
I see.
But he was deceased, and so there wasn't the opportunity to meet him. But the sister helped her find out more about him.
Well, that's a wonderful story. I imagine it feels good every time you're successful with something like that, huh?
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
Great feeling to help. So you give a lot of talks, you teach people about DNA, and you help people find their birth parents. You sound like you're very busy. What's the future of your business? Is there room for more?
Yes, definitely. I actually have a team that helps me with the research. So there is definitely capacity to take on more work. And I'm being approached a couple of times a month. I have some people that have heard me on Wisconsin Public Radio on the Larry Mueller show. And we just do an initial talk, and oftentimes then I look at their DNA results in a preliminary review, and then I let them know whether I think that their birth parent can be found. And then we enter into a contract. I've got the lawyer background, and a contract for the research, and then that takes place. The research takes place.
Great. And I imagine you're not always successful. Is that correct? Or so far, have you been always successful?
I have been always successful in terms of saying, I believe it's this person or it's this set of brothers. But then there are cases where I haven't been successful in that we just couldn't figure out who the person was. So for example, I have a client where their father was the adoptee, and he was born in the 1920s. And within 4 hours, I figured out who the father's father was. So now I'm looking for the father's mother, and it's just not shaking out. So it's interesting because it could be a couple of things. It could be that mother was a recent immigrant. And then if that's the case, a lot of times you just don't have great matches. So we're always relying on those matches.
I'm sure there are many areas of the world where testing isn't as common as it is here. Is that the cause?
Right. So if she just came into the country, let's say from Germany, there aren't that many people who are from there who've tested. So, but we're not done looking. So we're still looking, and just sometimes things are complicated. It's also possible that she is related to the father, which makes the analysis more complicated. So let's say back in time, let's say they're third cousins, that the birth mother and the birth father are third or fourth cousins. Then it makes it hard to separate out those matches because I'm attributing the matches to the father when in fact they're covering both people.
That makes sense. And she would probably become easier to find in the future, if not now, as more people test. Is that correct?
Right. As more people test, we get more matches, and it makes it easier to see who people are.
Okay, great. Well, that's exciting. So do you do work for people in Dane County too?
Yes. Yes, I have clients in Dane County. I have clients in Milwaukee. And it's nice to work on those cases because I'm so familiar with the geography. And I know, for example, is this town next to that town? Whereas if it's a case where we're talking about Scottish people, I'm always looking on Google Maps and I'm looking, is this tiny little Scottish town next to that tiny little Scottish town? And after a while, I've got a good feel for things like that. Mm-hmm. But here, when I'm working on Wisconsin cases, it's just almost all in my head.
Good. Plus, there's no language barrier.
Right.
I imagine some records in foreign countries are difficult for you.
Yes.
So, this can be a work question or a personal question, but what accomplishments are you most proud of?
Well, I received my law degree, and I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of the work that I do now. It's very fulfilling for me, and it is incredibly rewarding. My clients get, a lot of whom have been looking for decades for their birth parent, end up learning about their birth parent and having that closure and those answers that they've been looking for their whole lives. So it's just really rewarding, and I have received some really great testimonials. I'm not an adoptee, and so I don't know what it's like, but in reading people's testimonials and stories and thank you cards, I am just blown away by the need that people have. And that's not to say everyone has that need. There are lots of adoptees who don't. But it is just amazing to see how that works.
That's great. Well, do you have any other stories you'd like to share with us?
I feel like I've always been close to Monona in terms of that first job. And I remember driving to work every day through Monona and thinking, like, what a nice community. I love the little houses. I love the big houses. I love the lake. And luckily our condo is right on the lake. So we get to look and see the lake every day. Just this last week, I saw a bald eagle, which I was surprised by, flying across the lake during breakfast. And, it's just a really neat place to live.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're glad you're here. Thank you very much, Mary, for coming in today. And I hope you enjoy life in Monona.
Thank you, Kate.